break those patterns. And breaking those patterns becomes the most important objective toward self-realization, self-actualization, which is to say befriending oneself. Because in that space of truly befriending self and recognizing self, actualizing self, you transmute all of the horrors of the past, whether they're generational that you're carrying genealogically, or whether they are nightmares carried over from a misspent youth or from being subjected to all sorts of horrors. We're able to absolve those stories, the pain, the trauma, in that act of befriending self and actualizing self. It's where the transmutation of all of those old imprints takes place. The absolution. In that pure action, divine action of absolving and redeeming and forgiving the past, we engage the flame of now.
For episode 31, I'm talking to activist Sacha Stone, who grew up in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe throughout the War for Independence. He established Humanitad in 1999 and has instigated peace initiatives and education programs and lobbied against human rights abuses in different parts of the globe. He also founded both New Earth Project and the International Tribunal for Natural Justice, which recently launched the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into Human Trafficking and Child Sex Abuse at Westminster Central Hall. You can watch the powerful testimonies from survivors and expert witnesses on the Commission's YouTube channel. There is talk that Donald Trump's Justice Department has filed thousands of sealed indictments against those that are guilty of these awful sex crimes and ritual torture, although this has not been reported by the mainstream media. This interview might be challenging and stretching for some, or even provocative. This is why we feel it's important to share. I'd love to hear what you think, so do write to us on connect@thefutureisbeautiful.co and share your thoughts in our online group. Please do support us in the making of this show by making a donation. You can set this up over on our website, www.thefutureisbeautiful.co, and then click on Community and Support. Talking to Sasha is really quite eye-opening. We discuss science and consciousness, such as using quantum biology to create supplements that cure the root cause of disease, how we can stand up to the system that imprisons us using law created by the very same system, and his work as a whistleblower. For this interview, we sit in Sasha's living room in London, and you can hear gently in the background the cars razzing around and the sounds of the city, adding a little drama to our words. I hope that you enjoy our conversation after this. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future, despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives. When we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. I am delighted today to be joined by Sacha Stone. Sasha, welcome to the show.
Nice to meet you.
And thank you for hosting us here in your place in London. Can we start by learning a little bit about you? There's so many interesting things that you're working on and you're involved in that I want to get to. But I know that you started off in music and that you were a rock star. Was there like a wake-up moment or something that happened that shifted you into the awareness that you have and wanting to do the work that you're doing now?
Well, I definitely wasn't a rock star. It's very kind of you to say that. It's delightful that
Wikipedia.
Well, so much time has passed that it's delightful that somehow history is able to reinvent itself in that way. I was definitely a disaster, which is the standing joke, in my own eyes in the music business, because I hated the whole thing. But for sure, I'm blessed to have worked with extraordinary, talented people, and we had great fun and did some wonderful tours and albums and things like that. But here we are in the 21st century. I turned my focus a long time ago, 19 years ago. I set up Humanitad in 1999. And that was really when my real rock and roll career began, in the sense that I determined to make a loud noise in shaping the world as I saw it. And I've spoken to this a great many times in the past, but it's connected to my background as a war child, which is always the greatest way to make determinations about how you want to change the world that you were born into. And here we are, a world which is very much engaged in the Third World War, so to speak, which is a psychological war, an information war, one where we're all wondering who we are and what we are and why we are, in Technicolor, in a way that I don't believe we ever have had to question ourselves before. So we're, in a sense, moving from a very linear, if polarized, world view into a kind of quantum worldview or quantum field of reality, where to be LBGTQRSTV, whatever, this whole idea about identification of who we are, lesbians and gays and transsexuals and all the rest of it. What are we? Where do we come from? How do we define self and identity? Is it that we're programmed by the Tavistock Institute or the Fabianists, that we're living out some kind of meta-programming? Or do we define ourselves as being what we see in the mirror of our own hearts I'm talking about? My background was war, rock and roll, and then peace activism. I guess you could call it that. Those are the three primary colors of my life. And they're all very much connected to the same flux, the same quanta.
Mm-hmm. How would you describe what that flux is? What it is that your energy is focused on?
Defining or endeavoring to define self, true self, or self with a capital S, as I like to define it as. Actualized self, not the self that was programmed, in my case, by the war child, by the cultural, intellectual, social programming going on in the 1970s and 80s, in my case. But the self that I recognize as being an agent of change, because I am able to identify my own divinity, so to speak. I'm able to disidentify from those false imprints, social contracts, intellectual constructs, the academic bullshit, the pornography of trivia and nonsense that assaults us as younger people through entertainment and media and education, whereupon we're supposed to frog march into the world to become that good little citizen, that lawyer, that doctor, and do the bidding of nasty old men, carry out the protocols laid out by Cecil John Rhodes over a century ago, or the Oxbridge set. Break those patterns, and breaking those patterns becomes the most important objective toward self-realization, self-actualization, which is to say befriending oneself. Because in that space of truly befriending self and recognizing self, actualizing self, you transmute all of the horrors of the past, whether they're generational, that you're carrying genealogically, or whether they are nightmares carried over from a misspent youth or from being subjected to all sorts of horrors. We're able to absolve those stories, the pain, the trauma, in that act of befriending self and actualizing self. It's where the transmutation of all of those old imprints takes place, the absolution. And then in that action, pure action, divine action of absolving and redeeming and forgiving the past, we engage the flame of now. And it's really engaging that flame and stepping into that flame, thereby being seated within that flame in the highest expression of pure truth, becoming crowned upon the throne of self within that flame of pure truth. That is where the true covenant exists. That is where the true soul covenant exists. The Holy of Holies, the Grail, so to speak. And then we engage the transcendental element of reality, because we've gone through the linear and binarized, polarized, dualistic paradigm. We've engaged the absolution principle, which is the transmutative element in the alchemy of being. And then we engage the transcendental. And the transcendental is the fun bit, because that's where we begin to manifest reality, project patterns of perfection into the field, anchoring them as we do and embodying them in our being, in the center of our being. We become the furnace, we become the catalyst, we become the crucible for change. And the things that we then touch in life become transformed. And that's the miracle. And that's the Christ flame. That's the bodhisattva. That's the being of service to others over service to self. It becomes the most powerful medium of transformation in this world. And as I said, that's the fun bit, the bit we should be enjoying.
And for you, were you ever a good little citizen? Or were you always sort of aware of the faults of the system in some way, whether you kind of realized it or not?
Of course, I was horrified by any systems. From the moment I was being traumatized by them, as most, if not all of us are. But I recognized it early on. And the only thing I credit myself with is never having fallen foul of drugs and alcohol in my youth, to the extent that I never partook, ever.
You've never ever had a drink?
No, I'll have a sip of red wine if it's a good vintage and try to appreciate it. But no, I don't drink. And no, I've never touched any kind of what's commonly known as a drug. And there are many of them that I heartily approve of, incidentally. I've seen a lot of positive effect come out of people gargling mushrooms and ayahuasca and iboga and various other earth medicines, I think is the common term. But for me, no, I'm not. I have no interest myself. I've had sufficient transcendental experience without changing my blood chemistry with anything.
And in order to discover what you're sharing with us now, was this self-learning, a process that you took yourself on, or did you go to teachers at some point in order to open up different parts of yourself?
No, I never went to teachers. I mean, I did have a master in the late 80s and then again in the very early 90s. And I learned some very great truths, or so I like to believe, in the shadow of those masters. But I've moved on from guru and master early on and set about enquiry in the solitude of poetry, actually. I spent a great deal, many years, almost 10 years, writing poetry every single day, every single night for hours and hours and hours. That corresponded with my music career, quote unquote, because I was a very serious songwriter, so prose and poetry were terribly important. And understanding the abstraction that exists in good poetry, the negative spaces, the spaces between words are so much more important than the words. And that's what anyone who gets into the more abstract fields of art and poetry, like in Rumi type poetry or Sufi prose, you pick up an appreciation for the negative spaces. That's where the magic happens, almost certainly. And I definitely then transposed that same aesthetic onto reality, in as much as I then began to recognize that living in the cracks in the pavement was where the real shit happened, the good stuff, and not stepping on the paving stones. And if one is able to then inhabit the cracks in the pavement, so to speak, they're also the spaces where the blades of grass break through, the real life force exists, And so important to recognize these simple truths and not to square one's life up with the status quo and try to become recognized and received by the mainframe. So I had that rock and roll attitude, which is that it's preferable to live in the cracks in the pavement. I transposed that into life, moving from poetry, music, into the work that I do, which is to say, I identified early on that irreverence is a very powerful tool for reality checking. To not have reverence for things that are not worthy of reverence. So you don't go into the world respecting a policeman or a university professor or a diplomat. That's not to say you should breach protocol. I've always observed protocol, and I know that that's a conundrum. I'm attacked often as a peace activist and as a diplomat in the work that I do by people who say, look, he observes, the bishops and the diplomats by observing protocol. Well, if you want to navigate as a peace activist or as a diplomat, if you want to engage with governments and engage with the apparatus of the status quo in order to change it, you'd better bloody learn protocol, and you'd better learn how to observe it and carry it in grace, because otherwise you will just have a steel curtain, no doors will open, and you won't be able to affect the change that you like to pretend you can. So I was savvy enough, I believe, to understand that even 20 years ago, and so observed protocol. But that's not to say I observed reverence, because I didn't. I've been irreverent my whole life. Mm-hmm. And I don't have any respect for authority when it's imposed and not merited. Actually, there's no instance of authority that I can actually say I recognize now with reverence, especially not guru, incidentally, especially not the priestly type or the spiritualized intercessionary principle. I find that repugnant and very dangerous as well. Dangerous because it acts as the perfect firewall towards self-actualization. When we project outside of self towards the icon, the archetype, and give that thing more power than we give ourselves. I see in so much social media the kind of standardized Christian format, intellectual Christianity coming back and speaking in terms of always look up to, Jesus and hold Jesus higher, and he came and washed away our sins. Fuck all of that nonsense. Absolute bloody nonsense. The most abysmal kind of generational, civilizational mind control and idiocy. And yet I see how it seizes the minds and hearts of millions and millions of people, drives them into a frenzy where they'll protect that to the death, these false ideas. And all that they're doing is protecting their own fear matrix. And there's the irony, because these are the people who need to be redeemed and absolved from fear. But they're the ones who will wage the holy wars, whether they are speaking from an Islamic perspective or a Christian perspective or whatever perspective. So actualization of self is my religion and my spiritual formula and my spiritual objective. If there's any objective, it should simply be perfecting relationship with self.
And so if we look at where we are now, a lot of people listening maybe work for social enterprises or for charities or are doing things. Others will have more standard office jobs, maybe working in the media or in advertising or in government. Can you take us through what the system is doing to us as we go about these lives?
Let's keep it simple. All respect to people doing whatever it is that they're doing in this world. And we're all on journeys for all sorts of different reasons. And I've always seen the majesty of being a street sweeper. Every bit as there is majesty in holding the scepter and being crowned the king. That aside, the commonality is that all systems are entropic. All systems that define human beings into organized patterns of behavior and outcome, like jobs, taxes, social contracts. All of these systems are vile. All of them are spiritually bankrupt. All of them are entropic in the truest sense of the word, meaning to say that they are programmed to auto-destruct because they are not wired up in a way which makes sense to the organic, sentient, immanent human being, the fully realized human being. They are enclosures and containments designed for reductive idiots. And I'm calling myself an idiot here, as every bit as much as I'm calling you an idiot, or the butcher, or the baker, the candlestick maker. We're all idiots in allowing the continuance, the furtherance, the propagation of the status quo which is entropic and which contains us and encloses us in false constructs and feeds off our life force in order to self-exist, because that's what taxes are, the theft of life force, the theft of time and motion that you put into your daily wheel, your daily grind, stolen from you by a system which is in place and survives at the expense of you and I. I say that because you and I are programmed to get cancer and die of a slow death, whilst we are spending all the money we yet have on pharmaceutical products and doctoring and funerals. That's the horror of the entropic civilizational model that we sustain, that we feed, through the abnegation, through the non-confront of the relationship with self. So it's all us engaging ourselves in these cycles. It is not being done to us. This is the critical thing to understand. We are not subject to anything other than our own idiocy.
And I understand that on like a deeper level, but for most people listening, you go to school, you go to maybe university if you're lucky, you get a job, you try and put food on the table for your family, keep up with your mortgage, maybe you try and spend extra money on getting organic vegetables, and whether or not they actually are organic, who knows? Well, we can guess some of them. And so I do understand you saying that we're choosing this, but then at the same time, when you're in this, it seems quite impossible to think how another way is possible.
Well, you're negotiating the issue even in the way that you're asking the question. You're negotiating whether or not that is the case. And no, it's not the case. We choose it, we choose it, we choose it. We embody it, we die to it. You see, it's that simple. If we blur the edges of our comprehension of the fact, then we're in trouble. It's an absolute science. It's about accuracy. It's about absolute probity and absolute integrity. Absolute application of consciousness. Dynamic consciousness in action does not negotiate. It cannot negotiate. There is no blurred line. I am killing myself by living in this environment and doing this job and feeding myself these foods and my children, subjecting them to the mindfuckery of governments and taxes and entropic models of reality at every turn, when you turn the television on or when you walk into the high street or when you get onto a train. All of the social contracts that impose themselves on us, they are all limiting. They are all programmed with entropy, with death. My favorite subject, birthdays and time and the celebration of time, which is such infantile, moronic idiocy at the civilizational level. Again, not popular to talk in these terms, but it is what it is. If we want to remove ourselves from these cycles, from these patterns, then let's remove ourselves from these cycles and these patterns. And let's do so by recognizing the ritualism that we're engaged in in furthering these patterns and these objectives, like singing goddamned happy birthday to one another once a year, like lighting up goddamned birthday candles once a year, like pretending that it's good and proper and right to celebrate time, which is a calendric system imposed by a deviant Vatican complex many centuries ago, which did nothing more than remove us from the circadian rhythms and the real rhythms of natural rhythms of the earth and the seasons and the stars.
How do we live in the world without time?
By doing it, you're looking at me.
For you and I sitting here,
I know the question before you finish it.
We had to arrange a time to meet.
Actually, no. This is immaterial. We could have called it 0 point time, which is a clock system that we actually conceived of some years ago and actually launched, but no one picked up on it. At some point, they will, and it will gain traction. 0 point time is the same time everywhere on Earth at the same time. So all you and I needed to do was to communicate and say at such and such a time, which is 1200. ZPT, 0 point time, we'll meet. That 0 point time is configured to the Giza Plateau being anchored in central sun midday. But in Guatemala and Mozambique, it would be exactly the same time. And humans could then get back into observing nature, observing the sun, moon, and stars, observing the seasons, feeling them, feeling their way intuitively toward what time of day it is, more or less. And then magic happens. It's called telepathy. That's our psionic intelligence that activates as well. So if you and I are compacted to meet at some point mid-afternoon over yonder hill, well, we will remember it and we will meet over yonder hill in much the same way we did for thousands of years. So let's not pretend that time and the observance of calendric systems and wristwatches does anything more than commercialize us in an exquisitely refined way and monetize us for taskmasters, for black priests, bankers. That's why we observe time, and that's why it's been put into the program, and we've been suckered and dream-spelled into observing it. And everything we do is now fractioned into seconds and milliseconds. It's disgusting. It's terrifying. It's where the devil conducts his orchestra. For those who can see it, it's diabolical. So the greatest gift we could give ourselves as a civilization, I said this 5 years ago when we launched the New Earth Project, was we should remove ourselves singularly from time and collectively. Have nothing to do with it. I don't. I've never worn a watch. I don't observe times. I'm lucky enough to get prompts on this phone 15 minutes or thereabouts before I've got any meetings. And I'm generally always prepared for them, whatever it is.
But that's because somebody else organizes.
That's fine, but it's because I'm observing the fact that others who want to speak with me are living in that flux, but I don't live in that flux. And I don't conduct my symphony using that methodology because I observe and I recognize how mutant it is. Genuinely. I mean, ask the people who know me, who live around me, and I'm probably very annoying to live with because I really don't observe time and I don't recognize. Last week I put a birthday hat on for someone in my life who birthdays are very important. And I observed by wearing a silly birthday hat, and I certainly didn't sing happy birthday, but I certainly made it clear that I found the whole ritual, absurd. If I had children, I would program them against time for sure. And to some extent, my mother did that to me. So I have that benefit. She told me, I think I was 3 years old or 2 years old, and I'll never forget it. It was a Christmas tree, and she said, little Christmas tree in the house, and she said, kids, this is the last time there'll ever be a Christmas tree in the house, and we will not observe these nonsensical things, so get used to it. And we went into life pretty much not observing them thereafter.
Yeah, I'm just taking a moment because I've never thought about time before.
Well, it programs death into our DNA. It's your 73rd birthday, and you've got 50 people around you singing happy birthday and reminding you that you're 73 years old. Well, the Bible reminds you that you're dead after 70, So you're now 3 years older than when you should have been dead according to the dream spell cast by the biblical meme. And you get what that does to you. So you wake up every morning thinking, my God, I'm 73, I'm 3 years older than I should be, than I have a right to be. And that's part of how we program death into the DNA. It's very, very dangerous stuff. Where the mind goes, the body follows. We know that. That's our quantum, the basis of all quantum physics.
Yeah, no, I've thought about it from the lifestyle perspective of this is the time that you're supposed to have children if you want to do that, and this is the time that you're supposed to work and progress and, you know, own your own house and and then you retire, and then shortly after that you disappear. Like
all
that's
a program.
all kind of
all a program.
I've thought about that being a program, but I've never actually thought about that.
There are souls in the world who are over 1,000 years of age. Absolutely.
In a body that
yes, in the same body that they were born into. Yeah.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. After this interview, I'll happily share some of that with you and let you have a look at some photographs. But there are beings that, and so-called immortals, who are way beyond the remit of normal time. And we now are at the brink of quantum biological revolution. I'll discuss that with you later as well. It's not ready for public dissemination. But it is over. The whole game of what we believe ourselves to be as human beings and what we believe our allotment is of time is no longer exists in our generation. We are engaging the imminent, immortal, a rekindling of the immortal DNA, so to speak. And this is not spiritualized woo-woo talk. I'm speaking in terms of the most advanced molecular biological research and discovery of what it is that makes up the human being. So let's go into that momentarily. That well over 90% of the DNA in your body is non-human. It's microbial DNA, nothing to do with human DNA. And yet that composes well over 90%. Microbial DNA and microbial cells, and genes, there are far more of them than there are human genes in your body, over 90%. So that should tell us, and we've just recently discovered that, very recently. Now, there are ways of triggering in the human body different patterns through electrochemistry and quantum entanglement, creating different phenomena at the level of DNA in the human technology, the body, which will resurrect and bring back our capacity to live for centuries in the same way that the biblical patriarchs did thousands of years ago. Factually, none of this is conjecture. None of this is fantasy. Mainstream academia, in its infantile idiocy, believes that the human should die between 75 and 95. But they know nothing about what went before. They know nothing about biology. Why do I say that? Because that's fact. Because medical science and health science has only studied less than 1% of the information matrix of the human body, which is human DNA. How could they possibly know the big picture if they've only been focused on less than 1% since Watson and Crick discovered DNA? So the quantum biological discoveries that are opening up to us right now, and we, my organization, are deeply invested and embedded at the front end of that. Very happy and very lucky to be so. The things we're learning from the most extraordinary academic minds right now are phenomenal in extreme. But I'm happy to put whatever reputation I do have on the line and say that in your lifetime, the re-emergence of the immortal, imminent human technology is absolutely assured. No question about it. We have the technology today. How long it takes to transpose onto the high street or into the mainframe of our culture remains to be seen, because there's so many diabolical interests that work against these innovations coming to market.
Is the mainframe even open to that?
Well, it's not, so long as academia is allowed to educate the young. It's not so long as the media are allowed to continue to mind fuck the proletariat, that's you and I, it's not so long as the organs of governance and politicking are allowed to continue with their proliferating, their deceptions, their treason against the people.
How do we get these things out into public domain with these challenges? But before that, I just want to touch on this that you're sharing. How do these things not just become a wealthy elite thing where if you have enough money, then you can access these kinds of things, in the same way that I've heard what some wealthy people are doing around technology and what they're building and creating to protect them? How do we kind of make these things available and accessible?
By observing patterns in the past and seeing how these things play out. Invariably, innovations, when they do come to market, are very expensive in the beginning, and that is perfectly understandable. And that's just the way it is until we're in an enlightened, completely zero-point social ecology in the future, which is absolutely going to happen. Till we are living as an enlightened species on an enlightened planet, that is going to be the case. You're going to have innovations that occur. They're going to be expensive at the front end. Wealthy, high net worth, affluent people are going to be able to afford them. And then as the monies come in the front end, the manufacture scales up and the price scales down. And then it hits the street. Whereas when television sets came out, they were implausibly expensive at the very beginning. Very, very few people could afford them. And then, of course, within a couple of decades, everyone could afford them. That's just basic economics playing out, social economics playing out. There's no secret there. Things can't just hit the street. Mm-hmm. It's not possible that they can just hit the street. You've got to get past the special interests, especially if you talk about medical science innovations or health science innovations. That's the work that we are most preoccupied with right now.
And do we have time?
Yes, time is of no consequence or consideration.
Of course.
to those who are enlightened enough to recognize mm-hmm. that. To people who believe that we're running out of time and are still buying into scarcity economics and into a fear-based social ecology, they will simply be caught up in the flux of their own nightmares, their own projections, until they are no longer caught up in their false projections and nightmares. So the scarcity economics model, which was very carefully inserted into the mainstream by a Luciferian known as Al Gore with his godless PowerPoint presentation some decades ago, about 20 odd years ago, I think it was 15 years ago. That was one of the most godless exercises in Dream Spell that worked perfectly. It was a program, it was a psyop, it was heavily financed, it used the arteries of mainstream academia and media, and then even entertainment, to sell that Luciferian or false light narrative to humanity about polar bears drifting off on packs of ice, the North Pole melting and so on. Well, why is it that we have more pack ice in the North Pole today than we did half a century ago? Well, Al Gore doesn't appear to be answering the question, nor do any of these idiot Oxbridge mathematicians, or not mathematicians, geologists and climatologists.
So you don't believe that sea levels are rising?
I believe
the temperature is rising?
No, I don't believe any of that nonsense at all. Variously, temperatures are rising and falling. It depends where you're taking your readings. Yes, these phenomena are occurring all the time, and they've got everything to do with the placement and or displacement of our Earth, our planet, in the solar system, in the context of its movements within the spiral galaxy of the Milky Way. So you've got these constant changes are happening and are quite needful and necessary. They are astrophysical, they are astronomical, every bit as much as they are connected to cows farting in the North American plains. But the point is not that. The point is that we are being sold a lie through the arteries of media and academia. And we are buying into those dream spells. And they are creating a scarcity economics modeling whereupon billions of human beings who have been bewitched into false light or Luciferian notions of reality are then projecting our own ideas of reality into the field. And they are based on false information. So we then project our collective plasma And the outcomes that then manifest are negative outcomes. That is called reality. Those are the mechanics of manifestation. That's quantum physics playing out in the real terms. So what do you want? Do we want to be clever and catch up with ourselves, or do we want to be bewitched and spellbound into the program, into the programs that suit the business models of Luciferians? And by Luciferians, I mean false light worshippers, people who sell false knowledge and who project false ideas into the field. Because that describes the flux that we're caught up in as a civilization, as a species, as a peoples.
And so that applies to climate change in that example, or to
It's
terrorism, or any of these
terrorism is a good
things
one. Climate change is a good one. There's only one form of terrorism, and that's called government. And governments create and sponsor and finance and proliferate and perpetuate terrorism. Always have, always will. Way before the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans took the citizenry into their thrall, same today. We are all in the thrall of governments which control the media apparatus needfully in order to survive. That's their own survival reflex, is to be able to propagandize. And they do it very, very well today. And we have these diabolical events that occur, and the Queen dutifully turns out at the funerals or makes, the right kind of somber commentary. But it is the state, it is the crown, so to speak. Cronus, the titan that devours its own young. Cronus is the crown. The crown is the thing that demands allegiance and that usurps the sovereignty of the true sovereign. The true sovereign is the living man and living woman of the living soil. We tend to forget that. So we choose to be indentured into the idolatry of monarchism, buying into governments and party politics, and buying into the dialectic that's sold us through the television screens. That's binarized reality complex, as I said, infantile idiocy, but we choose it as a program until we no longer choose it. And you no longer choose it when you recognize that it kills you, that this is the stuff that we're franchising one to another, and that is actually offering our babes up for sacrifice. When we truly step into that flame of being here, now, and recognizing pure truth. Pure truth requires that you lay down the toys, that you don't hide behind these memes and these false projections and these cultural ideas and education patterns. Lay them all down and see what you see. Do you believe it is right that a man in a costume or a woman in a costume calling themselves a peace officer can pull out a notebook and give you a fine of £75 because your dog has taken a poop without you seeing it behind a tree, or because you walked across a road which wasn't a zebra crossing, or because you had a backlight wasn't flashing, because you weren't aware that the lords of time controlled the filament in the light bulb and it happened to blow 20 minutes ago, but you weren't aware. And so because you don't have the correct papers at the correct time, you're subject to a penalty, to a fine. What kind of grotesquerie is this, where we allow people in costumes to penalize us for basic existence, and we find that acceptable? And it's happening to millions and millions of people every hour. Billions and billions of dollars a day are being generated through the penalization of living men and women of the living soil by systems that are so rogue, so out of control, and so unrighteous. That's the dream spell. That's what we proliferate. That's what we permission. I don't permission it. I will not be fined by a policeman. I will not engage a conversation with that policeman.
So what do you do in order to not then get court orders after court orders?
Get the court orders, see what happens. Let them deliver brown envelopes to the door. Don't answer them, don't engage the contract. There's many, many ways of engaging those processes and being able to defeat those processes. The UCC, Uniform Commercial Code filings, understanding, brushing up on law, learning how to do it. I'll give you an example. I had a beautiful woman here in her mid-70s a few weeks ago. I'll be making a film with her in the next couple of weeks, and that will come out shortly. Extraordinary Indian woman, And she was running her own business in Florida, the United States, many years ago, very successfully. She was a real estate dealer. And she was selling about 30 prime houses a month, winning awards, doing so well, looking after her family. Beautiful woman. And one day the police turned up and said to her, you have one of your clients is a drug dealer. She said, well, I have no idea who you're talking about. They said, well, you've taken a deposit from this individual. She said, well, how am I to know? They arrested her for being complicit with a drug dealer and receiving drug-related funds. And using a bunch of made-up statutes, they put this woman behind bars for 8 years.
8 years?
Yes. Destroyed her entire life, ripped her from the bosom of her family, destroyed her life, monetized her, probably made $3,000 to $5,000 a day off her while she was in prison by leaning against her birth bond, which is how it works. So we're monetized on the streets. We're monetized whilst we're sleeping in our bed. We're monetized every time we sign a piece of paper. You just don't know about how your signature's flipped and then discharged against your birth bond or your treasury bond. So human beings are collateral, are cattle, chattel. We are literally the sacrifice of innocence who are being monetized and harvested by Babylonian priests within the banking system. You just don't know about it. That's what finances governments. That's what finances all the black ops programs and so on. All the devilry that is thrown against us, works against us, is financed this way. We're part of this ghastly cycle that we know little about, and we don't care to learn about it, and that's the problem. We don't often brush up on this. We don't often care enough or pull our heads out of the sand sufficiently to go and study UCC law. Well, this woman did. She went to prison. She had a choice. Either she died in prison of a broken heart or a rapid onset cancer or something, or she chose affirmation and she chose to study law. She studied UCC law. She came out the other end, learning how to beat the system with its own stick. She doesn't pay taxes. She doesn't pay utility bills now. She knows how to offset all of that nonsense. People need to learn about that. And the International Tribunal that we set up is shortly going to be putting out workshops on UCC and educating people who care to learn about this, how to themselves step outside of the fiction of their own birth bonds and treasury bonds, and then actually claim back the monies from the system that the system has stolen from them, which you're allowed to do. It's a little complex, quite a bit of paperwork, but you can do it, and you should do it.
Wow. Okay, well, that's just blown a lot of our friends listening's minds as the possibility opens.
Well, if you are happy to follow this up with me in the coming weeks, I will happily let your network know exactly about these workshops, and they can participate, and let them be the first network, intelligent network, that activates these protocols.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Thank you. I was at the New Earth Festival in Akasha in Bali last year, and I saw the unveiling of the free energy machine on the last night of the festival. Can you share a bit about that?
I can share what I'm allowed to share, absolutely. Yeah. It's in with the Fritz Pop Laboratory in Amsterdam right now, has been for getting on for a year, and will be so for, I believe, a few more months. Some very exciting developments there. What I did at the time of the festival was said, this is what we're working on, and this is what this form of energy does and promises to the world. I did not say it was for sale and that we were about to distribute it. So we came under a hail of bullets months after that by people saying, and what happened to the cutie pie? Well, the cutie pie is doing exactly what we said it would do, which is continuing to be developed. At the point at which it is ready for release will be released, not before. But we're excited about it because it's doing more than just creating so-called over-unity. And you have to be very careful using that terminology, because technically there's no such thing. But other than creating energy, it is doing more than that. It's structurizing water and structurizing the atmosphere. And the implications of that are quite extraordinary. So we're being given the feedback by our technical and engineering guys who are controlling the process now and moving it forward. But we're excited and we're hopeful that we'll be able to stabilize the energy aspect of it sufficiently to be able to release it and get it out there. But that'll happen when it happens. And I am very unapologetic about the status. In retrospect, I should not have shared even our early adventures into this. But we did, and that's where we stand right now.
In retrospect, why?
Because what I've observed in the last year, and it was some of it was triggered by that, there is such a vicious, recalcitrant, shitty energy that comes from so many people through social media. It disgusts me to the core. We had the same thing after the seatings of the International Tribunal in Westminster a few weeks ago, where we staged a 3-day seating of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into human trafficking and child sex abuse. 3 days of seatings, which almost killed me and my team. It was so exhaustive to work for months and months and months and put that on and bring in police commissioners and survivors and bishops and secretaries of state and powerful people and get them all to England and finance it ourselves, because we didn't get the money through donations. There was some donations were made, but that was probably 10% of the budget. We pulled the thing off nonetheless, and it was such exhaustive work. And on the back of that, 31 hours of film footage released freely, given out there to the world to educate the world about ritual satanic abuse, about pedophilia, about human trafficking, about all these grotesqueries that are happening. And we did that in service. We did that in service to people and planet. And I honestly thought that we were so deserving after that of just, if not getting applauded, just to be able to relax for a few months and catch our breath, getting ready for the next seatings in Washington. But within 2 weeks, we were savagely under attack by people around the world, some real disgusting characters who I could happily name right now, but choose not to do in the light of grace. People I could destroy in an instant, who started making films and broadcasts about me personally, about our Chief Justice, about members of our commission, and saying the most disgusting things, making things up about me. I discovered 2 weeks ago that I'm the son of somebody called Sir Jeffrey Adams, I think it is. Never heard of him, but that apparently is my father. And apparently I am the scion of some generational satanic family, you know. And I'm part of a controlled narrative, doing a judicial commission of inquiry in order to create a soft exit for pedophiles. I mean, my God, what kind of distorted mind dreams that kind of antithetical story up to who and what I am and what 19 years of my life represents in service. I've never charged a dime for anything I've done. And yet, doesn't matter that you can pay 20 years of love and attention into remedy in this world, but you can still be subjected to the most grotesque, savage attacks. And these people are allowed to operate with impunity. And there's a handful of them, it's not just one. They're disgusting characters, and they proliferate social media. And then lots of people get on board and start withdrawing their subscriptions to what we're doing and not paying attention. And that kind of thing happened last year on the back of the Cutie Pie announcement. I saw that. I'll level out the field here. To every one nasty comment, we probably get 900. So it's like 1,000 to 1. We get so much support and love and adulation, but I'm still aghast at the low resonance of the attacks that do come at volunteers through social media. It's got to the point where we've begun to question whether or not we should withdraw altogether from social media, because the sniping is a distraction, and we are really trying to anchor patterns of perfection. And perfection means 100%, means really going for the full harmony of an outcome. And I don't like distractions, and I'm beginning to think that even engaging with social media is a distraction from the work that we do.
Does the work that you do not need the message of the work to be out there?
Well, not in the linear sense, no. Stuff does carry through social media, it is true. There are other forms of social interaction that aren't mainstream social media. Those, let's call them apparatus of communication, we're looking at very closely right now. Enlightened networks. So I'll give you an example, your own network. I know the people that recommended you to me, and I know that that's an intelligent, conscious connection. So it is pretty obvious to me that your network is going to be high resonance, and more or less pretty conscious. So for us to be able to communicate to conscious networks like yours is a delight. And we'd be happy to feed stuff there, but not just throwing it out to Zuckerberg Incorporated and allowing it to then be mutated through all sorts of algorithmic nonsense in the internet, because we know how that stuff works as well, and how we're tied into knots and turned against ourselves as conscious communities through these algorithms, and how our real support base is actually cauterized and deflected, and the troll element are allowed to feed back in and poison the water. So that's all part of algorithms that appear to being thrown into the system against conscious communities as they're evolving on the World Wide Web.
And do you think that happens in person conscious communities as well, on another level?
Almost certainly it does. I mean, I'm not aware of a conscious community that is a real success story.
No, they're all full of shadow, distortion, infighting.
More so than in the norm. The spiritualization of ego is about the most reformed and most repugnant form of ego you can have. And you'll find that the spiritualized ego occurs more or less keyed into conscious community development. I know that in Bali, I've been disgusted by that element since I chose to purpose my home out there toward a conscious community. And we've had a lot of beautiful people connected to it, and a lot of very beautiful high resonant people are connected to it and are developing it into a successful outcome. But my God, the degree of just sheer abject nastiness that we've had to deal with, and real creepy crawlies over the last 3 years, that willfully or unwillfully, wittingly or unwittingly, sought to destabilize and destroy this agenda. It's horrifying. But that's how shadow operates. It's oftentimes through agents who themselves aren't even aware that they are operatives of dark outcomes. They come in believing themselves to be spiritualized and to be doing the right thing, and I'm speaking my truth, and all that bullshit. But their truth happens to be toxic, and they'll speak their truth to others in that community and poison the water. And the next thing, you've created a collective shadow meme that then goes against the atom seed of perfection that is the genesis of that project or that initiative. And I've seen this happen so many times. And I've got a very good mind that is able to analyze things from a mathematical perspective. And I always employ what is known as MSET mathematics or Mandelbrottian mathematics against what I see in life. Since 1997, I've been able to deploy that analytic capacity, which is to talk in terms of Fibonacci, the fractal patterns of nature as they relate to social interaction. Because the way that shadow overtakes a community, you could almost photograph that or map it, and then you could look at it in terms of MSET mathematics and observe how that was a negative fractal form that was moving with a certain inertia under certain circumstances in order to destroy something. It's quite bizarre, but that is how shadow and light seem to interact, also more or less observing these mathematical laws of nature.
It's clear you have no fear, but when you're working on these things, whistleblowing, new concepts like free energy, this quantum biology, talking about the power structures of the system, you are putting yourself in danger. I put in inverted commas, and maybe the people around you or the people that work for you.
Yeah.
How do you manage, and how do they manage the inherent fear that's in society?
Just apprehend the notion that I put anyone else in danger, because that's false thinking. It's wrong thinking. No. I am not responsible or accountable for any single thought, action, or deed of another living soul. Be clear about that. So never put that onto me.
I didn't mean it
like that.
I know
that. I know that. I'm just helping you to sharpen I'm helping you to sharpen the focus here, because it's really important that we never allow ourselves to think in those terms, because that is the language of fear. And the language of fear is based on the language of obfuscation, meaning to say of misrepresentation unwittingly. So let's just be very crystal clear. We are all covenanted to be exactly where we are at any given time and doing exactly what it is that we're doing. And the owning of that fact is where pure truth resides. And it is only in the flame of pure truth that self-actualization occurs. And it is only through self-actualization that the powers of manifestation seize us, and we're able to actually manifest higher forms of reality. So that's the math of who and what we are in any given time, in any given engagement. Look, I've had things happen to me, horrible things, and I don't want to itemize them here particularly. But yes, I've had absolute attempts at my life. And no, I don't think they're particularly glamorous. And I don't think it's particularly sexy. And the last one in particular was particularly disgusting and horrible and awful to look at and observe and to go through, which took some months. And it was only retroactively diagnosed by one of the world's greatest clinics some months ago that it was indeed a particular kind of poisoning that was supposed to kill me. And that was in 2016. And it was horrible. And for the people around me who observed it and who were nursing me, it couldn't have been much fun. But it didn't kill me. There was an intercessory there, curiously enough, and irony of ironies, the intercessory was a master in Nepal who through remote engagement helped me to turn the corner in that particular case. But I don't want to particularly go into that story or other stories which were a bit more brutal and connected to guns and bullets and things like that. The point is this: you go into this kind of work either completely enchanted or bewitched by an outcome that you see that is burning inside of your conscience. And in my case, it was that in 1997, when I was seized with the knowledge of an outcome because I saw it. I absolutely saw it in a very transcendental state, but it was so absolute that I was able to carry myself forward and change my entire life, an entire vernacular, and move into that quantum space, and have never balked since in nearly 20 years. And what I've observed is a systemic, successful acceleration toward that outcome, to the extent that it's pretty much here and now. This year, next year, the year after, we pretty much arrived at that acme point, as I see it, connected to the limited prophecy that I was engaged with in 1997, 98, and 1999 over those 2 years. The fearlessness comes with that territory. I'm by nature a coward. I've always said this. By nature, I am a coward. By nature, I will be the one to run from a fight. By nature, I am the one who will put my foot to the accelerator and just get out, move. And yet, every time I've witnessed danger and been in a situation where others have been endangered, for some extraordinary reason, I don't run, I don't flee, I throw myself into the fight, whether it's a physical fight or whether it's a spiritual one, a psychic one. So that's just something that's unusual in my own nature that I've observed over the years. I said to you earlier today that there's some good rationale for stewarding a kind of psychopathy in yourself at a time like now, when the world is in such flux, when we're all completely wondering what the fuck is going on, sociopolitically, socioeconomically, galactically speaking, in every way, shape, and form, we're all in such an exquisite flux. I'm loving it, incidentally. But for many people, I can see the breakdowns happening, psychoculturally. I can see the breakdowns. I'm loving it. I saw that this was going to happen. But the best thing you can do in cases like this is to kind of embody or engender a kind of psychopathy within yourself, where you start to just disidentify with all of this stuff. Just really, not harden yourself, don't harden your heart. Just really stop identifying with anything and disidentify with all of these things. The problem comes when you take something seriously, when there's that knock on the door and you allow yourself to go into an adrenalized, they've come for me, or it's bad news, or there's another bill, or whatever it is. It starts with that. It starts with the knock on the door, believe me. If you're able to really disidentify with the notion that anything that knocks on your door has any thrall or hold over you, then you're winning the battle. And don't not open the door ever. Always open the door. Always march up to that door and open it, especially if you think it's a bailiff, especially if you think they're coming to get you. Walk up that door, open it, and project fire through your eyes. Literally, literally. See it as though you're part of the Mahabharata, the ancient Hindu epics, and that flames are coming out of your eyes, and open the door. Turn the game on itself. This is so empowering, and it's also the alchemy of transmuting fear into the other. But you must engage the flame. You must walk into it. You must walk into the cave. You must never cower behind the sofa or behind the bush, ever. Always walk into the flame. And that's where Atman, the highest expression of actualized self, emerges, and you become a god. And you see your godliness.
It resonates. I've had a few accidents. I'm somebody that might be scared of little things like traveling around, and I might be scared of walking over a rickety bridge or something like that. But then when I've had these accidents, all this energy comes to serve, to help, to be there. And that's really comforting to know that at the depth, there's that courage, and that actually things that take up so much energy are kind of inconsequential.
Yes.
So if we can just let go of those fears.
Absolutely. Like I said, false identification, identifying with things that don't in and of themselves actually exist, is where dream spell comes into being. We're sold ideas. The ideas don't exist. We're told that the ice caps are melting. We're told that we're running out of air, that we're running out of this and running out, and we believe it. And so we project that false belief into the field, and that then becomes the elemental cloud that then starts to devour us. And the next thing, we're genuflecting and paying money to the church to stave off the great day of reckoning. And you can't stave it off beyond a certain point. And with civilization at that acme point now anyway, when we simply need to stop running from self and stop abnegating our consciousness and our consciences, and just apprehend self, turn around slowly. Do it in a mirror. It always helps if you have a mirror there, quite literally. And look at yourself for the first time in your life and say, hey, how you doing? Good to meet you. Very powerful.
Brilliant. Having just spent 4 days in bed, ill, and this being like my first trip out of the house in days, this feels quite surreal. Also, it's like a recalibration of reality. Thank you.
Great pleasure.
And we'll post links to, it's in newearth.org.
Honestly, I don't know which is I think it's New Earth Project.org.
We'll post links anyway so that everyone can find out more.
Very good.
Thank you.
Great pleasure.
Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mentioned in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question. How will you create beauty in the world?